Welcome, brothers and sisters around the world. This is your host, Dr. FM, Francis Mpindu Munangi, here at Love Bay Afrobeat Music and Talk Radio. We are in the process of trying to link up with Professor Rukuni right now. You know, when we deal with people around the world, oftentimes, depending on where they are in the world, although we rely on social media, the networks, and all that, sometimes they can also be a challenge. So as soon as Professor Rukuni links up with us, we will be able to bring him in. In the meantime, I just wanted to let you know that when you look at today's Africa, the Africa is spelled with a K instead of the usual C. This is a development that happened to us some time back when we connected with Professor Rukuni, who is one of the biggest voices in Africa and around the world when it comes to land matters. He is one person who has done a lot as far as helping people to understand the value of the land. And of course, you know, in Africa in particular, where land has had quite a history with people from the um, continents above Africa, in Europe, and even the West, the US and Canada. However, we are excited about the opportunity to bring him in to talk about land governance as a microcosm of national development. This is a very, very important topic. And so we are uh, sitting at the edge of our seats and waiting and hoping that he will be able to link with us not too far from now. In the meantime, we'd like to encourage you, if you have a comment, if you have a question, if you have um, something you would like us to consider as we progress today, that you would put that in the chat, and our brother Theo, who is in the background, our engineer, will ensure that that information is passed on to me so that we can incorporate that into our dialogue today. And of course, we always look at those 3Ds. We dialogue to discover things that will help us to decide on to the next steps. So again, this is Love Bay Afrobeat Music and Talk Radio, coming all the way from the studios in Toronto, Canada. And we do broadcast in 140 different countries around the world. And so today is a very, very special day, a special topic, land governance is a microcosm of national development. And we are waiting to link up with um, uh, the renowned Professor Rukuni, who has had quite an impact in Southern Africa. I know for quite a while he was in South Africa, and now he is based in Zimbabwe. And so we're hoping that technology and the networks will allow us the favor and the opportunity to link up with him so that we can have this conversation today. You know, when you think of land, I mentioned that we do have a history in Africa where um, some people got together pretty much and divided the continent of Africa, drawing lines really in between cultures, in between people groups, and claimed different parts of Africa. And so that in itself has created quite a situation on the continent of Africa, to which this day, even to this day, we're still reeling from the effects of that decision that was made. And so we're really, really excited about the opportunity to have this conversation. And again, this is your host, Dr. Francis Mpindu Munangi, Dr. FM, coming live from Love Bay Afrobeat Music and Talk Radio. and we are um, sitting at the edge of our seats, waiting to link up with Professor Rukuni, who is a voice in Africa and around the world on land matters. And again, our topic for today is land governance as a microcosm of national development. And so, again, I'd like to encourage you to make comments, uh, write your questions out, and submit them and put them in the chat so that our engineer, Mr. Theo, will be able to help us to incorporate that into what we are talking about today. The format for today's Africa is one of those that over the years, Brother Theo, who is based in Canada, has had quite a big vision in terms of creating opportunities for people to talk about things, talk about topics, matters pertaining to Africa, what has happened, what is happening, and what we would like to see happen. And so the idea of bringing different people into the mix in terms of representation is something that we are really, really excited about. And just over the last few weeks, we have connected with a number of people, including Professor Rukuni, so that we would have these guests who are known for what they have stood for over the years to share with us their perspectives, what they see in terms of solutions. We're very solution focused. So this is not just us coming together to talk about things without determining what the next steps are, so that we can say, having talked about this, these are some of the things we would like to see happen as we interact. So we do have quite a lineup of guests. We have university professors. We have someone who was an ambassador from Tanzania to another country, and we'll be bringing them on. And we also have individuals who are practitioners on the continent in terms of business, in terms of um, entrepreneurial initiatives, in terms of law enforcement, justice. So we are really, really excited about this season as we bring on different people to participate with us. Again, this is your host, Dr. FM, coming from Love Bay Afrobeat Music and Talk Radio, based in Toronto, and of course, broadcasting to 140 plus different countries around the world. And so again, we are still waiting right on the edge of our seats, hoping to establish connection with Professor Rukuni, who is our specialist when it comes to land matters. So again, feel free to drop in some comments, some questions, or even if you have some topics that you would like to see us cover, please do mention that to us, and we will ensure that those comments and suggestions would be incorporated as we um, move forward. And again, I'm just going to link up with our brother Theo here and see if there has been any developments, any comments, any questions coming up, so that at least we could start moving in that direction. Again, this is Love Bay Afrobeat Music and Talk Radio. This is your host, Dr. FM. We're still trying to establish contact with Professor Rukuni, and hopefully...
Nothing so far. No.
Again, this is Love Bay Afrobeat Music. Okay. I hear that our technician is still working hard to establish contact with Professor Rukuni. One of the things that I just wanted to bring to everybody's attention, I think for Professor Rukuni, someone who has worked with different institutions or institutions of higher learning in Africa, one of the things we had talked about with regards to his presentation for today was to help us to understand some of the things that have happened in different parts of the world, including Zimbabwe, where we know that um, in 1965, we should go back before that to, I believe, 1890, when Britain sent people to Africa, and they came to that part of the world, which is now Zimbabwe. Well, it has always been Zimbabwe, but now it is Zimbabwe. And so after 1890, Cecil John Rhodes, who was then representing the um, the Kingdom of England, or United Kingdom, after establishing contact with the people in Zimbabwe at that time, Rhodes then did whatever he did to the point of allowing others to know about what they had connected with in that part of the world. And then Ian Douglas Smith, who had then been sent as a representative of England to be in Zimbabwe, which then they called Rhodesia, because they looked at Cecil John Rhodes and then they just played around with words, I guess, and then came up with the name Rhodesia. So Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, had been named after Cecil John Rhodes. And so it was Ian Douglas Smith then in 1965 who declared unilateral independence from Great Britain. Simply said, I'm here. I no longer want anything to do with Britain. I'm now in charge, and he made himself the prime minister. One of the most interesting things, and I digress a little bit here, because what happened was, instead of England, or instead of Great Britain fighting Ian Douglas Smith, they didn't. One of the catchphrases they used was, "These are our kinsmen. We cannot fight them." And so the understanding then was, let's let them do what they need to do. And so they were left alone, which in policing circles we've often said it's interesting how they would relate differently to their own and call them kinsmen, and yet they would be very ruthless and use brutality to connect with other people who were not their kinsmen. To which then we are saying today, our police services really need to think about, how do you treat your kinsmen? Because the brutality that we see in some circles around the world is a carryover from colonialism. And so we need to come up with creative ways of policing that support our own culture and the values that we have as a people, so that we not just police our communities, but we police with the community. Anyway, that's a discussion for another time. So Ian Douglas Smith then, after declaring unilateral independence in 1965 and becoming prime minister, we know that there were so many things that happened, to the point of land being taken over from the local people, the natives of Zimbabwe, and taken over by settlers, by people who had come from Europe. And of course, we know that led to fighting for independence. And that was based on, we want access in fact, it's said that we had to ask access to our land, which was already our land. So the people of Zimbabwe were saying, this is our land. We should not be pushed around. We should not be made to be in different parts of the world, I mean, different parts of the country where we know that we're not able to live healthy lives and thrive and have a sustainable lifestyles based on our land based. And I'm just delighted to see that right now looks like we have connected with Professor Rukuni. I just saw him briefly and he is coming in. Professor Rukuni, can you hear me? I know that our
So
technician, brother Theo, is doing
yeah,
all. There
it's
he
because
is.
I'm BBC, born before computers, so it took me more than 20 minutes to log on. My apologies.
Professor Rukuni says he was born before computers, and so it took him a long time to connect. Professor Rukuni, I wish you knew how delighted we are, sir, to actually finally have this connection with you. And there is no other person we would have wanted to have this conversation with on a day like today. So thank you, sir, and welcome. I am going to allow you to just tell us briefly, Professor Rukuni, who is Professor Rukuni? I am aware that I mean you and I have
Oh,
connected and have known each other for a bit, but I would like you to take the opportunity to just let our listeners know. And again, I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed. We have finally connected with Professor Rukuni, and we are delighted. Our topic for today is land governance as a microcosm of national development. And so this is Love Bay Afrobeat Music and Talk Radio, coming all the way from the studios in Toronto and broadcasting in over 140 different countries around the world. And we do have a number of people who have already logged in, and we were just on the edge of our seats, sir, waiting for you. So again, welcome, sir. Tell us, who is Professor Rukuni? What does he do? What is he passionate about? We know that you are connected with many institutions of higher learning, but let's give you the time to let us know who you are and whatever else you would like to share with us before we delve into our topic for today.
wow. Well, thank you. And once again, my apologies for connecting late. I'm born actually, I would say I'm African by birth and Zimbabwean by law. Um, born rural. I was born of fairly usual, hardworking African parents. My generation, all parents were hardworking. Got my kind of boarding school in Zimbabwe until I actually went to agricultural college before I went to university in 1976. Graduated in agriculture. Eventually completed my PhD on economics of small scale irrigation. But from 1980, like most of us who were born during the colonial period, we forgot our roots and focused on liberation. And eventually, when I got into academia, I just stayed there for a long time. And from 1980 to 2000, I was Dean of Agriculture at the University of Zimbabwe. I was not a conventional, and I'm still not a conventional scholar. I did everything I needed to be promoted up to professor, but I've really spent a lot of time realizing that I had lost touch with my roots. Everything I had learned, not everything, but most of what I'd learned formally in school was not jiving well with with African realities on the ground. And when I eventually retired, I'm 71 years old now. I then established a small little non-profit called Barefoot Education for Africa's Transformation, BEAT Africa, because I think we have to overhaul the entire higher education system in my country and in Africa. Of recent, I've been asked to be chair of the Zimbabwe Council for Higher Education. We have 21 state institutions and another 6 or so private institutions. So I cannot chair the board that regulates the higher education institutions. At the same time, also trying to figure out how we reform these educational institutions for higher learning. I'm so passionate about agriculture, land governance issues, broad-based development issues. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Professor Rukuni, it's wonderful to know the kinds of things that you have intentionally engaged in over the years. And I liked what you said, that I'm African by birth and Zimbabwean by law. I'm like, that is wonderful. I was reminding our listeners earlier on that this Love Bay Afrobeat music talk radio has this theme now when we talk about today's Africa. And we spell Africa with a K. And I learned that from you. The first time I connected with you, I learned that that's how you do it. So would you enlighten us? Why do you spell Africa with a K instead of the usual C?
I'm sure you've had a similar experience to what I've had. I mean, I've been up and down the entire African continent. I have not come across any country or community where Africans pronounce K with a C, write it out with a C. Each time you hear that sound K, they write it down with a K. So, I mean, Africa with a C, we should be pronouncing it Africha or Afrisa. So, our tongue right across the continent, it's definitely a K. Even America should be spelled with a K. Yeah.
You know, the first time you brought that to my attention, I was really fascinated by how you think. You're the kind of person we could say in today's terms, you think outside the box and without the box. And so you have reflected that in your life. I mean, when I think of some of the initiatives that you have had and have been a part of, and transformation comes to mind. I mean, you are a transformational leader. And so let's get into some of the things that we would like to hear from you. When you say that you have always had connections with the land, and you talked about having done your early university studies in agriculture. And then I didn't catch what your PhD was. You said it was in small economics. What?
I studied the viability of small scale irrigation in my own country, in Zimbabwe. I examined factors affecting productivity of small scale irrigation schemes in Zimbabwe. Yeah. So irrigation was my love for a while, because in my youth, my parents were the first in my district to establish a small scale irrigation scheme. So, and I always thought, oh, this thing has potential. So by the time I got to do my PhD, that's what I did it on. Um, but I'm still quite interested in those issues. But I really moved on from irrigation for the simple reason that although it does have lots of potential for transformation in Africa, but a lot of our farmers still are rain-fed agriculture. If they get extra water, it's better. Actually, it's more economic. It's more viable to supplement what they already have, as opposed to resettling people around dams and constructing fully fledged irrigation schemes, which I believe are not as economically sensible as supplementary irrigation. Yeah. Okay.
All right. That is really amazing. That as a young man, I guess that those concepts of irrigation would have fascinated you so much that you would actually specialize in your doctoral studies for that. I would love to get my hands on onto your doctoral dissertation. So I guess I need to go to the University of Zimbabwe to see if I can retrieve that. Hopefully, one of the things I've appreciated about the land of Zimbabwe is even though there could have been other areas where technology hasn't really caught up, the recording system and the way things are stored is one of the most amazing things that have always fascinated me, how they are able to go and retrieve documents from way back when. They're still intact somewhere. So I can't wait to have my hands onto that doctoral dissertation. Maybe some of our young people could build onto that and do something along the lines of irrigation. You're right, it should really be able to supplement. Now, Professor Rukuni, when it comes to land governance, you and I had this conversation not long ago, and we said you see that as a microcosm of national development. Give us your perspective on this. What do you see?
So uh, this perspective is a result of back in the 1980s. I started getting interested in the land issue once again because of the colonial legacy issue, of which my parents and my whole extended family were caught up in mass removals, land displacements, etc., etc. So it was always an interesting topic for me. But when I started um, getting interested in it as a scholar, I then naturally, back then the issue of African systems of land governance and the land tenure were kind of dismissed. And I had been one of many who were trained both in Zimbabwe and overseas as to how dysfunctional our land tenure systems are, or our land governance systems are. But as I got deeper into the issues, I then realized that in actual fact, African approaches to land governance and land tenure are as robust as anywhere else in the world, and that there was a confusion in the way not only technical people but scholars as well confuse land types of land tenure as opposed to security of tenure. So the most important concept I want you to focus on in this conversation is that land tenure security of a tenure system, security of any type of tenure system is a far more important concept to translate to reality than focusing on different types of tenure or lease, 99-year lease. You got a title deed, you got this, that, and the other. And of course, the colonial mentality was the title deed is the most secure tenure. So just convert everything to title deed. Then you have tenure security, then it's convertible. bankable, and so on. But in reality, any tenure system can be as secure as any other tenure system and can be converted to be part and parcel of a, structural transformation developmental process. So that's what I want to focus on. And when in 1983 I was asked to chair the Land Tenure Commission for Zimbabwe, it was a commission of inquiry. I was able to dig deeper into these issues and actually find that for early stages of any development in any civilization, the traditional systems of land governance are the most appropriate and the most secure of all. And I can go deeper into those aspects, but just in case you want to come in, I can pause there.
Actually, you know what? Let's proceed. I like the direction you're going because I think it's something that, yeah, I find that oftentimes we do things based on what we have been told or what we have been schooled in. And for someone like yourself, who is a transformational leader, like I said, thinking outside the box and without the box, you were seeing things that the ordinary person wasn't seeing. So yeah, let's proceed. Share with us why and how you made
So,
those changes.
so here, so here's what's important about tenure security as opposed to type of tenure. Every piece of land in the world, every square centimeter of land in the entire world today is governed by the same parameters as follows. If anyone's tenure rights is going to be secure, is governed by primarily four rights that have to be clear. Okay, the first and most important right is the use rights. When you're allocated land or you're given land with certain conditions, the most important first aspect is what uses can you put that land to? Can you build on it? Can you cultivate? Can you chop down the trees? Can you bury your dead on it? So, so for all tenure systems, the first thing that is to be clarified is what the land user is allowed to use that land for. Okay. The second most important element is that what are you allowed to do if you want to transfer that land? Can you sell it? To the transferability of those land rights. Can you subdivide? Can you bequeath to your children? Those rights must be clarified. Yes, you're allowed to sell. No, you can't sell, but you can bequeath to your children. No, you can't subdivide. Yes, you can subdivide and allocate to other people. So that's the second category of rights that have to be clarified. The third categories of rights is who is included or excluded in those rights. Okay, so in most traditional tenure systems, most immediate family members would be included. So if I have a son born in Mozambique and I'm a Zimbabwean and he doesn't even come to Zimbabwe until he's 30 years old, when he gets to my village, he or she has land rights. Okay, so the inclusion of land rights have to be clear. The exclusion, who is excluded? So you find that with the Western style tenure system, they only emphasize exclusion. Trespassers will be executed or prosecuted. They don't bother about inclusion rights, and I'll explain later why. So that's the third category of rights: who is included, who is excluded. The fourth is your 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 protection rights. If anybody is going to violate your rights, who is going to protect you? Who is going to ensure that your rights are secure and cannot be violated by anyone else? So there's four other rights that I could add to those four, but those are the four primary rights. the use rights, the transfer rights, the inclusion exclusion rights, and the protection rights. So once those four are clarified, it doesn't matter anymore whether it's couch, traditional land, or it's title deed, or it's a 99-year lease or a 10-year lease. As long as those rights are clear, the tenure is as secure as anywhere else. So if I put that aside as the first thing that we need to talk about, then we say, when is any type of tenure then appropriate for any stage in the progression of any civilization? So that I can put in three stages of development. So ordinarily, before we were colonized, and any civilization before it is quote unquote industrialized, most land is held by families under cultural, customary rights. Family. So land is basically territory for clans and families to reside on, and those rights are very clear for the different families and clans. But as and starting with Europe 200 years ago with England, when you modern day i- uh, industrial transformation, when rural agrarian economies translate to urban industrial economies, that whole process starts shifting land from just being territory to property. But now it's important to have properties for your factories, for your suburbs, for your houses in town. So slowly land transforms from territory to property. Now property, by its economic nature, is semi financial property. You can take yourself, Doc. You probably have a house, but and it is property in a sense that you have a title deed for it, and you could sell it if you wish. But how often do you sell your house, Doc? Most properties are there because they serve certain economic purposes. Okay, so even at that stage of development, most countries are now in kind of middle income status, because the majority of the population are not yet fully integrated in the modern industrializing part of the economy. But ultimately, when 95% of the population is now urbanized, almost every piece of land in the United States, Australia, or Europe is now not just property, but it's actually now finance. The banking system, etc., no longer looks at it just as property. It is actually now finance. Okay, so your property in Borrowdale, for instance, if we were a fully industrialized nation, it would probably have been mortgaged through some bank. You probably use it to secure loans, etc., or insurance, etc., etc. So your property in Borrowdale in Zimbabwe could be part and parcel of financial transactions throughout the world. Banks in New York and Berlin, and Sydney will probably be trading on your house, and you don't even know it. So property, so land transforms from territory to property to capital. Okay, so finally, when it's capital, it's a ghost. It's invisible. The bank in Johannesburg, it does not send its people to borrow there to check your house out and figure out what its value is. The system in each industrialized country already has systems and processes and data where your piece of property is already recorded. It's known, its location, its size, its value, etc. And a bank in Frankfurt will trade on your property without even knowing where it is. So, so if I take those two frames, the first frame, I'm saying, how do you ensure that land rights are secure irrespective of stage of development? Even pre-colonial, when we were on our own, land tenure was very secure because those rights were clear wherever you were in the village. It was clear what you could use the land for. It was clear, how you could transfer it or bequeath it. It was, all those rights were clear. After colonization, the colonials were trying to fast track us from land being territory to land being capital. So they would just come and remove us from where we are and mark out their own territory and call that property. But the nation is not yet an industrialized society. The society is not yet at a stage where the majority of people are part of manufacturing, industrial, commercial processes. So you create a dual economy. So eventually you have some of the land is got title deeds and is kind of commercialized, and the rest of the land remains customary land and is excluded from direct integration into manufacturing, industrial, commercial activities. So the long and the short is that the way land is governed today in any country is a reflection of the stage of development of that country and the extent to which its overall governance processes, its overall economic processes will be determined. So, yes, land governance is a microcosm of overall development of a nation.
Wow, this is quite an exposure here, sir. Thank you. I can only uh, let you know that we appreciate very much the kind of knowledge and insights that you're bringing into this dialogue today, just by virtue of who you are, what you are doing, and what you have done. This is very, very insightful. Now, uh, I can't keep up with my note taking in terms of some of the concepts that you're bringing to our attention today. And thank you very much for those of you who are just joining us. This is Today's Africa. We are here at Love Bay Music Talk Radio. This is your host, Dr. FM. And we have the privilege of having Professor Rukuni as our guest, our special guest today. We're talking about land governance as a microcosm of national development. And Professor Rukuni, you have highlighted some things that you kind of know in passing, but the way you have explained them to us with clarity really, really helps. And now I can see how we have been made to understand land is something that we need to move away from and embrace concepts that enable us to view land from a healthy perspective. Now, I know you're talking about the whole idea of ensuring that rights of the land are secure and moving away from customary land to then the title deeds, moving away from land being a territory, uh, moving away from land being capital. And I see the two concepts really side by side because I guess from what you said, the level of industrialization influences how the majority of the land would be used and how people would understand what is the value of land. And obviously, for those of us who have been exposed to different ways of looking at things based on our educational experiences, we realize that we've been made to think in a certain way, and some of those ways are not healthy. Now, as you look at Africa, and I know that Africa is not a country, Africa is a continent, and of course, we are one, we're supposed to be one. I'm hoping that in the next week or so, we'll be able to bring in someone who is very knowledgeable in terms of the concepts of um, Mzee Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, the late Pan-Africanist. So we'll be bringing that individual in to talk about our unity. But as you look at Africa, Professor Rukuni, and realize what has happened or what is happening to our land, what would you say? What would you say to African leaders today? What would you say to ministers of agriculture across Africa?
What I would say to them is something that took me a long time to understand myself. And I wish if I knew what I know now when I started my career as a scholar, I, I, I would have spared my students 90% of what I taught them because it was in the wrong context. And this is the context that I'm sorry to say it applies to every African country. There's no African country I've got to where I find either scholars or political leaders understand this concept. So here it is. Every single African country, 55 of the countries, is either in a low income or in a middle income trap. Okay. There's no single African country, not one, which is anywhere close to being a fully industrialized economy. Not one. Zero out of 55, Doc, is not an accident. Okay. Zero out of 55 means there's a major problem that we are not looking at. And the major problem is this: by a middle income trap, the main cause of it is that every African country is a dual economy. You don't have one economy, you have two economies running at the same time as a result of the colonial legacy. Now, when you have a dual economy, which was created as a result of a few colonials trying to farm and then run an industrial sector based on a few thousand farms or even few hundred farms, then mass exclusion of the rest of the economy into the manufacturing, industrial, and commercial activities still exists today, even in countries where we believe kind of industrialized. So I've been advisor to more than 20 African countries on different aspects. And the last country I really spent time advising on was South Africa, which until I did 2015, 2016, advising them on their land reform program and their agricultural modernization. And I also found they were in a middle income trap. You know, when you're in a middle income trap, it means there's rapid urbanization, but there are no manufacturing jobs that are being created. The economic growth rate is very low. Unemployment or equivalent rates of unemployment continue to go up. And the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And there's always growing political and social unrest. It never recedes, not because of corruption and maladministration, although I can say this as a scholar because I'm not in a popularity contest. Maladministration and corruption wasn't the problem, but the primary problem in every African country is the structure of the economy does not allow mass upliftment of people into manufacturing, industrial, and commercial activities. The domestic market for consuming manufactured goods and services will remain to be small. So it doesn't matter how fast you grow, you're going to hit a middle income trap. Okay. You can even reach a stage where you're able to manufacture anything like Brazil, but it's still in a middle income trap. They manufacture airplanes, motor vehicles, name it. But the majority of your population still cannot afford 3 meals a day. They're still poor. They're still out there at the periphery of the economy. So, my friend, that structural fault, and as I say to you, every single African country, including Zimbabwe, is either in a low or middle income trap. And if you're not aware of that, you keep being told half lies. They're not full lies. The half lies that the reason why you're not developing is because you got the wrong policies. You're told it's because of corruption. It's because you got of dictatorships. You don't have proper elections. I'm telling you, it took me a long time, but all that is hogwash because even dictatorships have been able to develop fully industrialized countries like Germany. It was created. A dictator created the biggest economy in the world, fully industrialized. It didn't them. And the reason why the Western scholars and the Western governments and donors don't tell Africans what I've just told you now is because the colonial project is succeeding because number one, it keeps Africans growing raw materials. The structure of the economy does not allow us to be manufacturing economies. We'll continue to produce raw materials for the Western world and then they export back to us manufactured goods and services. We're simply supermarkets. Africa manufactures 1.5%, less than 2% of all world manufactured goods and services. And yet we are close to being a fifth of the entire human race. 1.5%, Doc. Can you imagine? And yet we have more arable land than anyone else in the world. We have more natural resources. We've got the largest reserves of gold and a number of other minerals. We are by far the wealthiest nation, but we're colonized by a few very poor countries, UK, Germany, France, who have absolutely zero, no minerals. If they have a bit of coal here and there, no land. Now, the last time I looked, they are gunning for African land, and unfortunately, Africans are selling off their land to these so-called investors who are not doing much with the land except just speculate on the land. I won't even go deeper into that because it pains me if I tell you the average cost at which Africans are letting land go is $6 per hectare. Okay, that's the last time I looked at the figures. And when they got that land, they are still trying to grow food for export. They're not even trying to develop the local economies. So so that's the negative side. Let me go to what could be the positive side of things. I've also then studied how do you bust out of a middle income trap? Who has succeeded in doing so and how did they succeed? I'm going to explain that so that you understand the role of land in the structural transformation processes, especially of busting out of middle income traps. There's no single country in South America that has been able to bust out of a middle income trap. Not one, not Mexico, not Brazil, nothing. Not one in Africa, not Egypt, not South Africa, not Nigeria. Okay, so South America, all of Africa, zero. Only Southeast East Asia, we have a few tigers and dragons who learned a lovely lesson from Japan, who, after the Second World War, became the first non-Europeanized country to bust out of a middle-income trap and be able to develop a fully industrialized economy. Those who followed after Japan, be it South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, today China, this is how they did it. They realized that attempts to get out of middle income trap following advices of the World Banks and IMFs who focus on the wrong aspects of the structure of the economy, they assume you're a normal economy. So here's what Asian tigers and dragons were able to figure out. When you try to industrialize through export-driven industrialization, only a few companies succeed. If you push import substitution, industrialization, same problem. If you will be able to export quite a lot of stuff, but your own domestic market is small. So you're still going to be deep in a middle income trap. And thirdly, you could abandon all labor laws, build factories, and the Nikes of this world and others come and use your cheap labor to manufacture. You still don't industrialize. The only way to get out of a middle income trap is to go back to rural and mass uplift the majority of the rural population into manufacturing and industrial processes. Why? Because industrialization does not succeed until one or two things happen. The first is massive increase in productivity on small farms, so that food is abandoned. Until food is abandoned in any country, you cannot industrialize. Why? Because cities are difficult to, in fact, cities are the most difficult to govern when countries don't have enough food or food is expensive. Only when food is so abundant and at such a low cost that the household component of the budget in the cities is dwindling, it is small. Urban people no longer worry about where they're going to get the next meal. Labor costs go down, factories start growing, and then you are on your way to being a manufacturing country. This is how China did it. After 1980, they abandoned the communes and all that stuff and said, let's go rural. So the infrastructure in Africa is still designed for colonial economy. Even the best of our infrastructure in South Africa, Zimbabwe, it's still designed to take raw materials out of our countries and bring in imports. Why? It's only trunk roads. When you go out of the main roads, there is no infrastructure to talk about. If we are going to mass uplift people, that rural infrastructure is number one, so that it's easy to get in and out of the rural areas. And as I explained, or in fact, I didn't explain it properly in terms of then how does the economy start transforming once you go for a rural industrialization strategy. So industrialization basically is not a mechanical process. We confuse industrialization with manufacturing. Manufacturing is a mechanical process. Industrialization is not a mechanical process. Industrialization is a transformation in society, is the changes in every level of society, from the way we are organized in the village, the family, for purposes of increasing production, productivity, and diversity of products that we produce for factories. Now you are industrializing. In industry means now you know how to work better, faster, efficient, more productive. That's what industry means. It requires more social capital than economic capital. Industrialization is when society reorganizes. And that whole process, and I call it massification, kicks in. Massification in rural areas all the way to urban, meaning mass production of raw materials, and then mass processing of that raw materials within 25 to 50 kilometer zone. You don't mass produce raw materials and then track them 200 kilometers away to manufacture them. You have already lost your economic advantage. If you go to China between 1980 and 86, they kicked in the massification of production of raw materials, and at the same time institute village and township manufacturing, so that most of your products are manufactured within 25, 50 kilometer zone, and then mass consumption of our own goods and services within that zone. So mass production, mass processing, and mass consumption should happen within 0 to 50 kilometers. Now you've got a domestic market. Now you have your own people who are rural, who are producing something, delivering it, and immediately getting cash from a manufacturer and being able to produce more diversified products. Now, I gave you the Chinese example because it's the most recent one. I mean, they 1980 to 86, they'd killed the hunger problem, and between 1986 and 1994, there was already the rural manufacturing was everywhere. I don't know whether you're old enough to recall that even by 1992, we started eating noodles in Harare. So the Chinese had come within less than a generation from village and township manufacturing of their own noodles. And they were hungry, they were now full, and now they were exporting to us. And in no time, trinkets. You think noodles were being manufactured in Beijing? No, they were being manufactured in the village and township. Now, 40 years after independence, we still manufacture maputi in Harare. I mean, it should be the most expensive place to put some maputi. You know, we should be manufacturing these basic products, dairy products, milling products. This is rural, my friend. Then you create a rural middle class. Now, the most important aspect here of the rural middle class is this. The world over, studies have shown that rural people, when they earn on average $1, $2, $3 a day, it doesn't change their consumption pattern. When you start hitting $4, $5, $6 a day average, they change consumption patterns. They start consuming more manufactured goods and services. They start consuming more meat, more vegetable, more fruits. Okay. Now, that's the proper definition of middle class. Middle class does not mean people are earning $30,000 a year. Middle class means now you're consuming manufactured goods and services. And you don't need $30,000 a year. You $4,000 a year will do. That's the rural middle class. That's the class that develops a nation, not you and me uh, with fat salaries and eating imported goods and services. Rural people at $4 or $5 a day average are going to consume mostly locally manufactured goods and services. Now you've got a local economy. That's how China developed. That's how Japan developed. That's how United States developed. That's how all of Europe developed, by mass producing, mass processing, and mass consuming their own goods and services. Now, we think, no, now we just have to produce raw materials for export, and somehow we're going to be an industrialized economy. It's not going to happen. So, every African today who's being fooled that because things are tough in our countryside because of wrong policies, you are abandoning your land. No African should abandon your rural land, no matter how difficult it is, because there's no other starting point, my colleagues and friends. Economic capital is not the most important capital. Economic capital is embedded in social capital. When you have strong families, strong communities, strong systems, strong legals, that's what creates economic possibilities. So, economic capital, we are rushing for it, and meanwhile, we are forgetting our social capital. Our 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 families are crumbling. Our family systems are crumbling. Orphans everywhere. People, our
mm,
community systems are crumbling. So, economic capital is embedded in social capital, and social capital is embedded in environmental capital. But the colonials gave it all backwards. Now we think economic capital is the most important. Social capital is not important. The environment can look after itself until we get rich. Africans have to wake up. Land is your most important asset, irrespective of who you think you are and how educated or how wealthy you are. Look after that land. That's how you're going to have sustainable economic development, sustainable social development, and sustainable environmental sustainability. Thank you.
Professor Rukuni, you are you are making me mad. You're making me angry in a good way. And I thank you for that. I can only imagine how listeners around our 140 plus different countries who are tuned in today are reflecting on the information that you have shared with us. Sir, I know that this is short notice, but I would be honored to have us continue this discussion next week if you were able to fit into this schedule. But if you're not able to, that's fine. But I really, really think that even from the comments that we are receiving, there are questions that have come which we would like you to address, but now we don't have the time. I know we started late, but we usually do this in within an hour, and it's just like so much perspectives that you have brought to our attention. One of the listeners says, "Thank you for sharing these profound insights." This is Miss Chirinda, Professor Rukuni, and she wanted to see if you could have a moment to talk about gender and youth inclusion, to talk about land governance and social cohesion, in terms of contributing to social cohesion and peace building in countries like Zimbabwe and the DRC and Somalia and Ethiopia and Rwanda and all these other countries. Now, we don't have the time to delve into this. So, sir, I am asking you if it is possible for us to continue this dialogue next week, we would be honored. But if not, we would like to revisit this very, very soon so that we keep up the momentum because you have touched on some things, like I said. I am just feeling this healthy anger within me. You have really contributed to upsetting me in a good way today, and I think this is true of many of our listeners today. And so, Professor Rukuni, we can't thank you enough, sir. Um, I know that our time is up, and I really, really hate to wrap things up at this point. But, sir, we need to revisit this. You have touched on uh, just the breadth of knowledge you have and experience, and how you are even addressing some of the issues that we keep hearing on the streets, that it's because we have bad leaders, it's because we have corruption, it's because we don't have this, because we don't, and you're saying, no. From my years of experience in participating, especially at, in institutions of higher learning, I wish you knew how much I appreciated what you said earlier, that if I had known what I know now, I would have saved my students a lot of unnecessary homework and stuff that you were asking them to do, not pertaining to the kinds of
So,
things that really brings
sorry to
life
interrupt.
to us.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt your wrap up. So I'm saying all those are problems. But as Einstein said, you cannot solve a problem by addressing it at a lower level than it was created. So I'm just saying
Uh-huh.
the higher level strategic is this. And if you don't address that, you'll be addressing these symptoms. We are going to be where we are. We will change parties every day. But anyway, I know you're wrapping up. I thought I told you everything I know, but if you think I have more to tell you, okay, let's look for time. I don't know when. Let's talk
I
about it.
really,
Let's find it. Thank you.
yeah, I really want Professor Rukuni for us to revisit this. You you might have given us an overview of some of the
Okay.
things you know, but I really think that in just dwelling on some of these and just say, okay, Professor Rukuni, you mentioned this, and even just opening it up to our listeners. And now that we have you hooked up to technology, even though you were born before computers, now we have confidence that we can use this medium to connect and make sure that we are building on each other. And so again, thank you, Professor
Okay.
Rukuni. You have made our day, sir. You have given us food for thought, and even beyond that, you have given us things that we need to reflect on so that we can not just start thinking differently, but that we can start behaving differently. And one of the takeaways for me today, Professor Rukuni, is for us not to overlook and to move away from our rural land. That is one of the takeaways for me today. I have been thinking about this. I've thought about this. My wife and I have thought about things, but the way you put it, and you are living proof that this is important. I'm saying to myself, we really need to be intentional about making sure that this whole idea of moving into the cities, which the the European culture made us to understand, everybody move away from the rural areas and be in the city. I guess that has served its purpose. Now we need to open our eyes and revisit this and say, what has happened? Because a lot of those issues we're dealing with on the streets and in the cities would have solutions from a different perspective if we are willing to think outside the box and without the box, just like you do. So, again, Professor Rukuni, thank you so much. So, I'm going to be connecting with you offline so that I can let our listeners know when we
Uh,
will be having you back, because we certainly want to have you back. And again, our listeners, this is Love Bay Afrobeat Music and Talk Radio. This is your host, Dr. FM, streaming live from the studios in Toronto, Canada, and of course, connecting with different people around the world in 140 plus different countries. And so, thank you for being with us today. You will be hearing again from us soon, and we will be giving you an update in terms of when we will be able to have Professor Rukuni again. What a day! What a perspective, and what a wealth of knowledge this man has. Not just is he a resource to Africa, but to the world, because his perspectives are really lived experiences. And again, we thank those of you who have brought in some comments, and we will be looking into this and ensuring that Professor Rukuni is aware of this and will be able to pick up on this the next time we bring him. And again, thank you for being with us today. I know that we started late, but we are an hour and 10 minutes, and we usually just like to take an hour. We respect your time, and so thank you very much for being with us today. We look forward to connecting with you soon. Goodbye for now.